All right, so today we're going deep into 13th century philosophy, specifically the work of Simon of Faversham. You send over some really fascinating excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy about this British scholar, and I'm excited to kind of unpack his life and explore some of his key ideas in logic, psychology, and metaphysics. It looks like it's going to be quite the intellectual adventure.
Well, Simon of Faversham, he's a particularly fascinating figure, especially if you're familiar with the philosophical landscape of his time. He wasn't just repeating Aristotle, he was actually a modest, bringing a unique perspective to logic and metaphysics
Yeah.
that really kind of challenged the status quo of the day.
So a bit of a medieval rebel in the world of philosophy. I like it. But let's start with the basics. Who was Simon of Faversham?
He was born around 1260 in Faversham, England. It was a bustling seaport town. And from there, his life took him on this incredible journey through the great academic centers of his time. So he earned a Master of Arts from Oxford, taught in Paris, returned to Oxford for a Doctor of Theology, and even held significant positions within the church. Ultimately, he became the Archdeacon of Canterbury. Sadly, he died in 1306 during a trip to the Papal Curia, possibly due to a dispute over an appointment.
Wow, what a life. A true scholar, traversing borders and engaging in all the big intellectual debates of his era. But beyond his impressive resume, what makes his philosophical work so significant?
His commentaries on Aristotle are where he truly shines. I think particularly his work on logic and natural philosophy. For Simon, logic wasn't just this dry technical subject. He saw it as the fundamental toolkit for acquiring knowledge. He wanted to understand not only what things are, but also how we come to know them.
So he was interested in the very process of knowledge formation. It's pretty insightful for a 13th century thinker.
Exactly. And here's where things get really interesting. He even incorporated rhetoric and poetics into his understanding of logic.
Wait, rhetoric and poetics? Those seem pretty far removed from the world of logic and reasoning.
You would think so, right? But Simon argued that all three, logic, rhetoric, and poetics, they all rely on syllogisms, those logical arguments with premises and conclusions. The difference lies in the certainty of the premises. So a poetic syllogism might just aim to evoke emotions, while a demonstrative one seeks absolute, unshakable knowledge. He saw a kind of underlying unity in these diverse forms of human expression.
That's a surprising connection. It seems like he was interested in bridging the gap between different ways of knowing and communicating.
Absolutely. And this interdisciplinary thinking is evident in his exploration of language as well. There was this big debate at the time about whether words signify things in the real world or concepts in our minds, and Simon took a fascinating stance on this.
I'm all ears. What was Simon's view on this? Did he side with the realists or the conceptualists?
He argued that for certain words, those that name essences, like human or stone, they signify the essences themselves, not just our mental concepts of them. He called these words words of first imposition.
So when we say human, we're not just referring to a mental picture we have, but to the actual essence of what it means to be human.
Precisely. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. He believed that these words could retain their meaning even if all their reference in the physical world disappeared.
Now that's a mind bender. How could a word still mean something if there's nothing left in the world that corresponds to it?
Because for Simon, the essence itself could still be conceptualized even in the absence of physical instances. Think of it like a blueprint. Even if every building built from a certain blueprint crumbled, the blueprint itself would still exist and retain its meaning. It's a radical idea pushing us to think about language as something deeply intertwined with the very structure of reality.
That is radical. It seems like he's challenging the idea that language is simply a tool for labeling the world around us. Instead, it becomes a way of grasping the fundamental nature of reality itself. This is fascinating stuff. I'm already seeing why Simon of Faversham is considered such a pivotal figure in medieval philosophy.
He truly was, and we've only just scratched the surface. Next, let's delve into his psychology. This is where he tackles the age-old question of the soul and its relationship to the body.
Perfect. I'm ready to explore more of his thought.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Simon of Faversham.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around his idea that words can signify essences even if there are no physical things left in the world. It's like he's saying language has a deeper connection to reality than we typically realize.
He was definitely pushing the boundaries of how we think about language and its relationship to the world. But let's shift gears a bit and explore his views on how we actually think. His model of the active and passive intellects is one of his most intriguing contributions to psychology.
All right, let's unpack this. What exactly are these active and passive intellects, and how do they work together?
Imagine you're looking at a beautiful oak tree. You see its shape, its color, the texture of its bark. These are all sensory experiences. But how do you go from these specific concrete details to the general concept of tree? That's where the active intellect comes in.
So the active intellect is what allows us to abstract away from the particular details and grasp the essence of tree.
Precisely. It's like a sculptor chiseling away the unnecessary bits of marble to reveal the pure form underneath. The active intellect extracts the universal immaterial essence from the messy concrete world of sensory experience.
That's a great analogy. But where's the passive intellect fit into all of this?
Once the active intellect has done its work of abstraction, the passive intellect steps in to kind of apprehend or grasp that essence. It's like the canvas that receives the image projected by the active intellect.
So it's a two-step process. First, we extract the essence, and then we understand or get it. This interplay between the active and passive intellects is what allows us to move from the world of concrete things to the world of abstract ideas.
Exactly. And this process for Simon is central to how we acquire knowledge and make sense of the world around us. But as with many of his ideas, his account of abstraction wasn't without its critics.
Ah, so even a brilliant mind like Simon of Faversham had his detractors. I'm curious to hear what kind of pushback he received.
Well, some philosophers like John of Jandoun and Averroes questioned how something in a bodily organ, like the brain, could be made universal while still remaining in that organ. It seemed like a paradox to them.
That's a valid point. It's like trying to imagine how a physical thing could simultaneously exist in the realm of abstract ideas.
Right. And then you had other thinkers like Rodolphus Brito, also a modist, who rejected the idea of transferring a form from the material realm to the immaterial realm.
That does seem like a conceptual leap. It's like saying you can take the wetness out of water and transfer it to something dry.
Exactly. So both Jandoun and Brito were pointing out what they saw as fundamental problems with Simon's account of abstraction. It just goes to show that even groundbreaking ideas are often met with resistance and skepticism.
But isn't that the beauty of philosophical debate? It forces us to refine our thinking, to strengthen our arguments, and to consider different perspectives. Who knows, maybe Simon even revised his views based on this feedback.
Perhaps he did. Unfortunately, we don't have access to all of his writings and responses, but it's certainly possible that these criticisms spurred him to further develop and clarify his ideas. Now let's move on to another fascinating aspect of Simon's thought, his views on dreams.
Oh yes, I remember the article mentions something about his unique take on dreams and their significance.
He had some very interesting ideas about where dreams come from and what they can tell us. He believed that dreams could arise from our bodily humors, that ancient idea that our personality is determined by the balance of fluids in our body.
So an excess of black bile might give you nightmares.
Exactly. But he didn't stop there. He also believed that dreams could be triggered by memories bubbling up from our subconscious.
That makes sense. Sometimes it feels like our dreams are replaying fragments of our past experiences, or even creating entirely new scenarios based on those memories.
And here's the most intriguing part. Simon also believed that some dreams could be influenced by celestial bodies, by the stars and planets.
Whoa. That takes us into the realm of astrology and the idea that the cosmos can somehow influence our inner world.
He was particularly interested in premonitory dreams, those that seem to offer glimpses into the future, like prophecies. But he was also cautious, emphasizing that these dreams required skilled interpretation.
I can imagine there were quite a few medieval dream interpreters trying to decipher these cryptic messages from the cosmos. It makes you wonder what Simon himself dreamed about and how he interpreted those dreams.
It does. Unfortunately, we don't have any records of his dream journal, but I'm sure it would have been fascinating reading.
Agreed. Now, shifting gears a bit, I'm curious to hear more about Simon's take on metaphysics. The excerpts you sent over mentioned his work on universals and the essence-existence debate.
Those are two of the biggest questions in metaphysics, and Simon offered some truly insightful perspectives. Let's start with universals. This gets into the very nature of what it means for something to be universal. Is it a property inherent in things themselves, or is it something our minds create?
That's a question that has puzzled philosophers for centuries. Where did Simon stand on this issue?
He argued that universality isn't something that exists out there in the world independent of our minds. Instead, it arises from the way our intellects understand and categorize things.
So it's not that there's some mystical universal tree floating around in the ether.
Right. It's more that we encounter lots of individual trees, each with its unique characteristics. And our minds recognize the commonalities, the shared essence that allows us to group them together under the concept of tree.
So we create the universal by recognizing the shared essence among individuals.
Exactly. And here's another fascinating wrinkle. Simon argued that a species could exist with only one member.
Wait, a species with just one member? How does that work? Wouldn't that just be an individual, not a species?
Think about the sun or the moon. In Simon's time, they were considered species. They're unique, one-of-a-kind entities. But he didn't think that disqualified them from being species.
So he's saying that the number of individuals isn't the defining characteristic of a species. It's more about the essence, the set of defining qualities that matter.
Precisely. For him, if a species needed multiple individuals, it would have to be based on either the essence itself or its existence. He rejected both possibilities.
Okay, I'm following so far. But if a species doesn't need multiple individuals, why do we see so many different humans, dogs, trees, and so on in the world? Why this abundance of individuals within a species?
That's where Simon's ideas about individuation come in. He believed that in our sublunary world, everything below the moon, a single individual never fully exhausts all the matter that could be actualized by its essence. There's always leftover material that could potentially be shaped into another instance of that essence.
So there's always the potential for more cookies from the same cookie cutter, to use your earlier analogy. The essence is like the blueprint, and the matter is like the raw material waiting to be formed.
A perfect way to put it. But what about those superior beings, the ones above the moon? They don't seem to multiply in the same way.
Right. They seem to exist as unique individuals, not as members of a species with multiple instances.
That's because, according to Simon, their individuation is based on something he called subsistence. Their inherent uniqueness, their irreplaceable essence. They're not individuated by matter like earthly beings.
So we had a twofold account of individuation, one for material beings and one for immaterial beings.
Exactly. And this distinction reveals his deep engagement with Aristotle's metaphysics while also going beyond it.
It's fascinating to see how he's weaving together different philosophical threads, trying to create a coherent picture of reality.
He was a master synthesizer, but also a bold innovator. Now, are you ready to grapple with the essence-existence debate? This is where things get really metaphysically challenging.
Bring it on. I'm ready to dive deeper into the mind of Simon of Faversham.
Ah!
All right, let's tackle this essence-existence debate. It sounds like we're getting into some deep philosophical waters here.
We are. This is a classic metaphysical puzzle that has kept philosophers busy for centuries. In a nutshell, it's about whether existence is a separate thing that gets added to an essence, or whether it's somehow baked into the very definition of a thing.
So are we talking about whether something can have an essence even if it doesn't exist, like those unicorns we discussed earlier? Or is it about whether existence itself is a kind of ingredient that makes something real?
Both of those questions are at play here. And Simon of Faversham, being the meticulous thinker, that he was actually grappled with different facets of this problem throughout his career. Early on, he seemed to lean towards the idea that essence and existence are distinct, with existence being something bestowed upon created beings by God. He even suggested that all created substances are a composition of essence and existence.
So at first he thought of them as two separate ingredients, like flour and sugar in a cake.
That seems to be the case. But later on, he shifted his view, arguing against Aquinas' position that existence is a real thing added to the essence. He carefully laid out his reasoning, highlighting the philosophical problems with treating existence as a separate entity.
It's fascinating to see how his thinking evolved over time. It sounds like he was constantly questioning and refining his own ideas, which is the mark of a true philosopher.
He was. And even though he ultimately rejected the idea that existence is a real thing added to an essence, he still maintained that existence is something added to created beings.
Now that's confusing. How can existence be added if it's not a real thing? What else could it possibly be?
This is where Simon gets really subtle. He argued that the distinction between essence and existence is ultimately a notional one, not a real one.
Notional. I'm going to need you to unpack that one for me. What does that even mean in this context?
It means that the distinction exists in our minds in the way we think about things rather than in the things themselves. We can conceive of the essence of something without considering whether it actually exists. For example, I can have a concept of a unicorn without believing that unicorns actually exist.
I see. So he's saying that the distinction is in how we conceptualize essence and existence, not in whether they're actually separate things out there in the world.
Exactly. He even went so far as to say that existence is a notion we add to the definition of an essence, a notion that refers to the relationship between a substance and its cause.
So we can think about a substance in two ways. According to its essence, what it is, and according to its existence, its relationship to its cause, how it came to be. It's like we're looking at the substance from two different angles.
A perfect way to put it. It's a subtle distinction, but it has profound implications. He's suggesting that existence isn't a property inherent to a thing itself, but rather its relationship to the web of causality that brought it into being.
Wow, that's a pretty mind-blowing idea. And it ties in nicely with his view that words signify essences even if there are no corresponding things in the world. It's like he's grounding both language and existence in this realm of essences that transcends the ever-changing physical world.
You've hit the nail on the head. This is what makes Simon of Faversham's metaphysics so compelling. He's not just rearranging philosophical furniture, he's offering a new way of understanding the very foundations of reality.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the depth and complexity of medieval philosophy. I used to think of it as kind of a dry, dusty subject, but now I see it as this vibrant world of ideas full of passionate debates and groundbreaking insights.
It is, and Simon of Faversham is a prime example of a medieval thinker who is wrestling with questions that are still relevant today. He was a true pioneer, challenging the status quo and pushing the boundaries of philosophical inquiry.
He certainly was. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for his work and for the power of philosophical thinking in general. It's not just about abstract theories, it's about grappling with the fundamental mysteries of existence, about understanding ourselves and the universe we inhabit.
Well said. And that's the beauty of a deep dive like this. It allows us to connect with the great minds of the past, to learn from their insights, and to carry on the torch of philosophical exploration.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks for taking me on this incredible journey through the world of Simon of Faversham. It's an experience I won't soon forget.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time, keep those philosophical fires burning.